Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports Little Football video, and today I'm going over my Week 15 Power Rankings for the 2024 NFL season. It's been a wild season to start off. I did miss last week's Power Rankings, unfortunately, simply because I had a job transition and I didn't have any time Sunday night to make a video. But now I have some more time to get back into it. So without further ado, let's get started. First off, as always, we have the dumpster fire. We have the Raiders at 32, the Giants at 31, the Bears at 30, the Jets at 29, and the Patriots at 28. The Raiders are the only team left in the league that have 2 wins. They had a couple of good wins earlier on in the season. They were able to beat the Ravens. They were able to get a win against the Browns. But they've lost a lot of consecutive games. Sorry, the Giants also have 2 losses. They both have 2 losses, and both of these teams are just atrocious. The Giants almost were able to get the win this week. But their against the Saints, but their last field goal was blocked right at the last second. They were going to bring it to overtime, but the Saints did get the field goal block, which averted overtime and allowed the Saints to win outright. Both of these teams are horrendous. The Giants have gotten rid of Danny Jones, and their backup quarterbacks have not been sufficient to take over and win games. And then the Raiders have had a revolving door all season. For the most part, Aiden O'Connell's been playing, but the loss of Devontae Adams was also huge. Brock Bowers is the only positive of the Raiders season this year. At number 30, we have the Chicago Bears, and then the Bears have had possibly the most disappointing season of the last 10 years. They started off 4-2. Caleb Williams looked promising. To be fair, those 4 wins were against teams that they should have beaten in their sleep. And then they lost 7 consecutive games to now be 4-9. The Bears are not in a good spot. They will not be making the playoffs, and I don't think that Caleb Williams is having. I think Caleb Williams is having the worst rookie season out of any of the quarterbacks that have played a lot of time. I think that Jaden Daniels has played better. I think that Bo Nix has played better. I think that Drake May has played better. I don't think any of them are particularly close. The Bears have not even been close in their last few games. They've been demolished by the 49ers. They've been demolished in every game that they've played recently, and it's not even a question. They are possibly the worst team in the league right now. The Raiders and Giants have just been worse for longer. The Jets are at 29, the Patriots are at 28. These two teams have been pretty much right next to each other for most of the season in the power rankings. They have the same record. They beat each other in the regular season. They're 1-1 against each other. For the most part, the reason why the Patriots are above the Jets is simply because the Jets are on a downward trend. They began the season, I believe, 2-3 or 2-4, and they're now 3-10. And the Patriots started off with a win in week 1. Then they lost a bunch of games, and then ever since Drake May has taken over, the offense has looked completely different. The defense has been horrendous, but the Patriots have been improving, whereas the Jets have been getting worse. Moving on to the former dumpster fire. These are teams that previously have been in the dumpster fire. We got the Titans at 27, the Jaguars at 26, the Browns at 25, and the Panthers at 24. Yes, the Panthers are at 24. The Titans and the Jaguars, again, they've been pretty much tied at the hip the whole season. The reason why the Jaguars are above them in the rankings is because they have the tiebreaker over them this season. They beat them this week. Mac Jones had 2 interceptions and 0 touchdowns, but they did win the game 10-7. Trevor Lawrence has been injured. Mac Jones has been playing, and for the most part, it's been horrendous. It has been awful. Mac Jones has not played well, and we're seeing that it wasn't just the Patriots' terrible system that broke Mac Jones. He just has lost his ability to play competently. That's basically what I've been seeing as I've been seeing the Jaguar season progress with Mac Jones. As for the Tennessee Titans, the Titans have had some flashes of some positive games with Nick Mullins at quarterback. Nick Mullins has always been a decent quarterback. I've never seen him as a bad quarterback. And he's been relatively good for Tennessee. They haven't been able to win a lot of games, but they're able to beat the Patriots. They're able to have some competitive games, and they should have been able to win this week. I do think that they're better than the Jaguars, but the Jaguars got the win, so they get the spot. The Browns are at 25. They improved a little bit with the addition of Jameis Winston. Their only redeeming game recently was the game against the Steelers, where they were able to get a phenomenal upset win against Pittsburgh, mostly probably because it's just an AFC North game, and you could have a 1-15 team against a 15-1 team in Week 17 of the season in the AFC North, and it would basically be a toss-up. It does not matter who's playing. It does not matter how good the teams are. The AFC North is a toss-up every single time. So that game probably did benefit the Browns. Since then, the Browns have been pretty terrible with Jameis Winston, but overall, it's been better than it was earlier on in the year. The Panthers are at 24. The Panthers are actually playing very well. I think that Bryce Young is finally hitting his stride. He's maturing a lot as a player, and I think that he could potentially have an okay season next year. For the most part, Bryce Young had a pretty horrendous first couple of years of his career, but they played a very competitive game this week against the Eagles, who are one of the best teams in the league. They played an extremely competitive game the last couple of weeks against the Chiefs and the Buccaneers, and then the weeks before that, they won a couple of games against the Saints and the Giants. So over the last 5 weeks, they've been playing like, not playoff teams, but they've been playing like a mid-average team that may have gone 500 this year, you know? They beat the Saints, they beat the Giants, and their only losses were like 3 to 4 point losses to the Eagles, Buccaneers, and the Chiefs. So good on the Panthers for kind of turning their season around, and good on Bryce Young for having some competitive offensive games down the stretch. Moving on to the 2025, we got the Saints at 23, we got the Cowboys at 22, we got the Colts at 21, we got the 49ers at 20, and we got the Falcons at 19. If the Cowboys do win their game tomorrow, then they'll stay at the same spot. I don't intend to move them up above the Colts. And then if they lose their game tomorrow, then they'll stay in the same spot. I don't intend to move them below the Saints. A win would be relatively impressive, but not a huge shift. And then a loss. The Bengals are a good team, so they'll probably stay where they are. The Saints, this week, they were able to pull out their game against the Giants. Again, the Saints started off strong. They started off good. They started off, I believe, either 3-1 or 2-1, and then they quickly fell off. They lost 6 or 7 games in a row, and then they were able to find their stride again. They've won the last couple of weeks, and they are competing for their division. They won't be winning it. They're 2 games behind Tampa, but they are competing for their division at this point. They've had an okay season. They've had a really up and down. They've had a really weird quarterback room the whole year. Alvin Kamara's been good for fantasy, but he hasn't been the best running back in the league for productivity and efficiency. And the defense has been horrendous. The offense has been very good, even though it's been a little inconsistent, but the defense has just been atrocious the whole year. The Colts are at 21. The Colts are 6-7. Again, they've been stuck at 500 the entirety of the season. They cannot get out of the 500 purgatory. Every time they lose a game, then they win one, and they're just kind of stuck in this rut. They were able to win. Last week against the Patriots. It was a very close game. It came down to the last field goal, and it was a 68-yard field goal, and it was inches away from going in. Joey Sly was inches away from banging that through. The Colts would have lost, but they did end up getting the win over the Patriots. The last couple of weeks, they also beat the Jets, so they've beaten a couple of the dumpster fire teams, but they're not fantastic. The 49ers and the Falcons are 2 teams that have had direct opposite seasons. The 49ers started terrible, and then as Christian McCaffrey and the rest of the team's gotten healthy, they've improved. As for the Falcons, they started off the season blazing hot, and then now they've lost their division, and they're continuing to drop further and further down every single week. The Falcons, I think, are destined for failure for the rest of the season. I do think that they obviously have a chance to make the playoffs, but I can't imagine them winning a game in the playoffs this season. Kirk Cousins has had a good year. He's had a pretty solid year. But for the most part, he was really good in October, and he has not been good any other part of the season except for October. They've lost to most of the good teams that they've played, including the last 4 consecutive games, to the Chargers, the Vikings, the Broncos, and the Saints. And for the most part, the Falcons just have not been competitive in games against good teams. And again, they started off 5-2, I believe, then they were 6-3, now they're 6-7. And so they keep losing week after week after week, and they will not be making the playoffs, I don't believe. As for the 49ers, they're also 6-7. They've improved ever since Christian McCaffrey came back, but they still cannot play well against solid teams. They got demolished last week. This week they were demolished, but they're against the Bears. Moving on to dangerous if they make it. We got the Bengals at 18, the Cardinals at 17, the Buccaneers at 16, and the Dolphins at 15. First off, we got the Bengals. The Bengals are 4-8, but Joe Burrow is fighting for an MVP award. I think it's more than likely that Joe Burrow will not be winning MVP, especially with how impressive Josh Allen's second half of the season has been. I think that Josh Allen's trying to get into that, solidify his position as the best quarterback in the league this year. And Saquon Barkley also could win it as well. So Joe Burrow, I don't think will be getting any first team All-Pro or MVP awards, but he is having an MVP caliber season. He's on pace for 45 touchdowns, only 8 picks, and he's on pace for just a phenomenal year. But unfortunately, it won't come to anything because of how bad the defense has been. The Cardinals are 6-7. They've had an up and down season. They started off bad, and then they had a huge winning streak, and now they've kind of regressed a little bit again. They've had one of the toughest, if not the toughest, schedule in the entire league, and it's really killed them the last couple weeks because they've lost to Seattle twice. I thought that the Cardinals were the favorites to win the division, but the Seattle Seahawks have really clutched it up. Beating the Cardinals twice was a huge boost for them, because if they had lost one of those games, then the Seahawks, the Rams, and the Cardinals would all be tied at 7-6. Now they got 2 games on the Cardinals and they got 1 game on the Rams. So the fact that the Cardinals blew both of those games shows that they're not ready to take that next step and be a contender. But if they do somehow make the playoffs, they could be somewhat dangerous. The Buccaneers are 7-6. Again, they also had a slump in the middle of the season. I believe they started off 5-2, and then they end up 5-6, and now they are 7-6. So they're bouncing back. They've had a couple of impressive games in a row, and the biggest thing for them was they lost both games to the Falcons. That was back when the Falcons were cruising in October, and the Buccaneers were on their slump. The Buccaneers have part of that slump was because the Buccaneers were missing Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Mike Evans has returned, and ever since Mike Evans has returned, the Buccaneers have returned to their former glory as a team. And I do think that the return of Mike Evans is going to be huge for the Buccaneers to secure this division this season. As for the Dolphins, they're also 6-7. They were able to get the victory over the Jets this week, which was questionable at some points of the game. I didn't think that they're going to beat the Jets, but they did eventually win, and they're now 6-7. They've won most of the games that they're supposed to win with 2 of the season, and then they've lost a couple of the competitive ones. But for the most part, they've played well while Tua was in. They've played almost like a playoff team while he's been in, and then he obviously missed a few weeks, which made them drop below 500. Moving on to our playoff caliber teams, we got the Texans at 14, the Commanders at 13, the Seahawks at 12, and the Rams at 11. The Texans and the Commanders are both on downward slopes. They're both 8-5, which is still a decent record. But I believe the Texans started either 5-1 or 5-2, and the Commanders started, I believe, either 6-1 or 6-2. And so they're both on relative losing streaks, and most of those losses have been to relatively good teams. They don't seem like they can compete this season. I thought that CJ Stroud was going to take his next step up this year. Part of the reason why he hasn't is because of the injuries to his wide receivers. They've played a lot better ever since Nico Collins has returned. But for the most part, I thought that this was going to be the year that CJ Stroud made his next step up, and the Texans were going to be a threat in the AFC to be the best team in the league, to get the 1 seed to beat Kansas City and to take over the throne. They're not ready for that this year. They might be ready for it next year. Joe Mixon's been huge, but the defense and CJ Stroud's inconsistency have been the biggest issues for them. As for the Commander, again, both of these teams, Houston played this week. The Commander, I forget which one of them played this weekend. They may have both had a bye week. I don't remember exactly. As for the Commanders, the Commanders did not play this week. As for the Commanders, they have had a relatively poor second half of the season. They've lost to pretty much any team that could have possibly been competitive, including the Steelers, the Eagles, and the Cowboys. The Cowboys game was a killer, as that was on that wasn't on Thanksgiving, but the Cowboys game was a killer because it was a divisional game. It was against the Cowboys, and that's a game where you really need to win with the season the Cowboys are having. The Seahawks, on the other hand, and the Rams are both on the upswing. Once the Rams got all their wide receivers back, they've been demolishing people. This week they beat the Bills in a high-powered matchup, 44-42. Josh Allen had 51 fantasy football points. And earlier in the season, the Rams were able to get a win over the Vikings. The Rams have beaten 2 of the top teams in the league. They're 7-6, but just like always, they can beat anybody at any given moment. And they are definitely a threat if they make the playoffs. As for the Seahawks, they're 8-5. 8-5 is a respectable record. It's very strong. They are looking to win their division, but whoever basically wins between the Rams and the Seahawks in their next matchup, I believe, is going to get the division. I think that's basically what it's going to come down to. The Seahawks started off very strong, then they started playing some good teams, and they lost it a bit. I do believe that Geno Smith will regress to the mean, and he will always end up with 9 or 10 wins. And they're never going to be super competitors, but they're going to be solid with Geno. I do think that the Rams have a better overall outlook as a team. They're more consistent. They're less consistent, but they have a better overall potential. And so I think that that's what separates them from the Seahawks, because they can beat those high-powered top 5 teams, and the Seahawks have not been able to do that. Moving on to the strong contenders, we got the Broncos at 10, we got the Chargers at 9, we have the Ravens at 8, the Packers at 7, and the Steelers at 6. The Broncos this season have had a phenomenal year. Bo Nix has had a really, really impressive second half of the season. The Broncos are now up to 8-5 after starting, I believe, 3-4. They've won 5 of their last 6 games, and they haven't all been the easiest games in the world. The Broncos have had a relatively difficult schedule. They're in a tough division, and their only loss, I believe, of their last 6 games was to the Chargers, which is why the Chargers are still above them. The Chargers do get the tiebreakers over the Broncos. But with that being said, they also did lose the game against the Chiefs. But that Chiefs game was competitive. The Chargers game was competitive. And they don't go down without a fight. The Broncos have been a strong team the whole year. They demolished some really good teams, such as the Buccaneers. Bo Nix has just really come on strong this season. He could arguably be the best rookie quarterback this year. As for the Chargers did lose this week against Kansas City. It was a tough game, but they are now 8-5. They have beaten the Broncos head-to-head. They've lost to the Ravens head-to-head. And so because of that, they're kind of stuck at number 9. All 3 of these teams, the Broncos, the Chargers, and the Ravens, are all pretty solid teams that kind of need a little bit more to hit it to that next level. But I think that the Chargers are more consistent against bad teams, whereas the Ravens have a higher ceiling when it comes to beating good teams. The Ravens are 8-5. They didn't play this week. They had their bye week finally. Derrick Henry is no longer in the MVP conversation. Saquon Barkley is going to run away with the best running back in the league award. But with that being said, the combination of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson is lethal. Derrick Henry is the second best running back in the league this year. Many will argue that he still is the best running back in the league just because of the pedigree that he has. He has cemented himself as a Hall of Famer for this season. And the biggest issue for the Ravens is that they can't close games down the line. That's what Lamar Jackson's issue has been his whole career in the playoffs. And I think that if we want to see the Ravens do well this year, they need to figure that out. But with that being said, they're still a top 10 team for sure. The Packers and the Steelers have had phenomenally dominant seasons. I've been high on both of these teams the whole year. I think that Russell Wilson was the perfect fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do think that they're going to beat Kansas City a couple weeks from now when they do play them. The biggest thing for them was that loss to the Browns. If they hadn't lost to the Browns, they'd be in perfect position to get the 1 seed. They are 10-3. They're going to be 10-3 once they. They are 10-3. They are 10-3. They're having a phenomenal year, and the Steelers are just a very impressive team, both offensively and defensively. This is their best season in a while. They should win their division relatively handily, and there's not much else to say about them. As for the Packers, they're not going to win their division. They're actually in 3rd place in their division right now, which is insane to see for a 10-3 team. But Jordan Love has really matured his game. He's thrown a lot of interceptions, but he plays smart football, and he plays aggressive football. And aggressive football is going to win you games in this modern league. And so, they're 9-4 now. They did lose 1 game. That's my bad. They lost to the Lions on Thanksgiving. But even that game was very competitive down to the very end. So, for the most part, they've only lost to divisional rivals that are slightly better than them. And most of the losses in the NFC North are not outside the NFC North; they're within the division. So the Packers have just had a phenomenal year. Finally, we got the NFL's elite. We got the Vikings at number 5. We got the Eagles at number 4. We got the Kansas City Chiefs at number 3. We got the Bills at number 2, and we have the Lions at number 1. All these teams have 2 or less losses, except for Buffalo. Buffalo did lose this week to the Rams. But I kept them above Kansas City, even though Kansas City won their game this week, simply because they do have the tiebreaker. And I just think that the Bills have had a more impressive season. They've been able to put more points on the board. They've been more consistent. And Kansas City's won a lot of games by inches, by centimeters. They've won a lot of games by refereeing. They've won a lot of games by fluke plays. And so Buffalo's retaining their number 2 spot. As for the Vikings at number 5, the Vikings have had a really impressive season. Sam Darnold did have a slump in the middle of the year where they lost a couple of games. With that being said, those games were valid games to lose. One of them was against the Lions. The other one was against the Rams. Again, the Rams are wreaking havoc in this top 5. But they lost to the Lions and the Rams, which are 2 very respectable losses. And then this week, Sam Darnold's saying, hey, don't count me out of the MVP conversation yet. I'm back in it, baby. He got 350 yards and 5 touchdowns. He lit up the scoreboard, 130 yards and a couple touchdowns for both Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. Huge games for everyone involved. As for the Eagles, the Saquon Barkley will be, I believe he should win MVP. Nobody else deserves MVP as much as Saquon Barkley does for the season. Huge kudos to him and what he's been able to do this year. He has 1,630 yards in 13 games. He's on pace to get 2,000 yards with a game to spare, which is, I believe he needs to get 2,000 yards with a game to spare in order to win MVP, but he's on pace to do it. Again, I've already talked about Kansas City, I've already talked about Buffalo, and then the Detroit Lions are the best team in the league. They are unfazed by whoever they play. They will win high-powered shootouts against the Packers. They'll win any game that you put in front of them, and the Lions are the most consistent, well-rounded, and best team in the league for this season. So, thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace.